The blood on her dress had long since dried by the time Adelaide Kingsley stumbled into Lavetta, Colorado, her feet blistered and bleeding through worn leather boots that had never been meant for mountain passes. Behind her lay 3 days of running, 3 days of terror, and a lifetime of bruises that mapped her skin like a violent geography lesson in what men called love, but felt like war. It was late September in 1876, and the aspens were turning gold on the mountainsides surrounding the small mining town. Adelaide had heard about Lavetta from a woman in a wagon who had given her a ride for half a day before turning east. The woman had pressed a few coins into Adelaide's palm and told her that Lavetta was small enough that a new face could disappear, yet large enough that questions were not always asked. Adelaide had thanked her and walked the rest of the way, her ribs aching with every breath, her left eye still swollen nearly shut from where Marcus had hit her 5 days ago. Marcus Pemberton had been her husband for 2 years, though calling him that felt like giving the devil a title of respect. She had married him at 18 because her father had gambling debts, and Marcus had money from his freight business in Denver. She had learned within a week that Marcus considered his wife property to be used and discarded as he saw fit. His fist spoke a language Adelaide had learned fluently, and his mouth had never once touched her skin with anything resembling gentleness. When he kissed her, it was possession, brutality, a claiming that left her lips bleeding and her soul shrinking. 3 nights ago, she had finally understood that if she stayed, he would eventually kill her. The realization had come when she woke on the kitchen floor, unable to remember how she had gotten there, blood pooling under her head from where it had struck the iron stove. Marcus had been snoring in the bedroom, drunk on whiskey as usual. Adelaide had taken nothing but the dress on her back and had run into the Denver night, heading south and west toward the mountains, toward anywhere that was not there. Now she stood in the dirt street of Lavetta, swaying with exhaustion, squinting through her one good eye at the buildings that lined the main thoroughfare. A mercantile, a saloon, a blacksmith, a small church with a white steeple. Everything wavered in her vision like heat shimmer, though the autumn air was cool and crisp. She needed water. She needed somewhere to sleep. She needed to disappear. Her knees buckled and the world tilted sideways. She heard someone shout, heard boots running, and then there were hands on her, catching her before she hit the ground. Strong hands. Large hands. For a moment, pure panic flooded her system and she tried to fight, tried to pull away, a wounded animal sound escaping her throat. Easy, easy now. The voice was deep, rumbling like distant thunder, but surprisingly gentle. "I am not going to hurt you, miss. You are safe." Adelaide forced her eye open and looked up into the face of the largest man she had ever seen. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a leather cord. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes were what caught her attention. They were gray like storm clouds, and they looked at her with something she had not seen in a man's eyes for so long she had forgotten it existed. Concern. Genuine, unfeigned concern. "I am fine," she managed to say, though they both knew it was a lie. She could barely stand, even with his arm supporting her. "You look like you have been through hell and back," the man said bluntly. His voice carried a slight accent, something European that she could not quite place. "When did you last eat?" Adelaide tried to remember. The woman in the wagon had shared some bread and cheese. That had been yesterday morning. "Yesterday," she whispered. The man muttered something under his breath in a language she did not recognize. Then gently, carefully, he lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. Adelaide stiffened. every muscle in her body going rigid with fear, but he did not squeeze her broken ribs or handle her roughly. He carried her as one might carry something precious and fragile. "My name is Thomas Garrett," he said as he walked down the street, his long strides eating up the distance. "People here call me the Mountain Man because I live up in the high country, only come down for supplies. You are going to stay with Doc Henderson and his wife until you are well. They are good people." "I do not have money," Adelaide said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "Did I ask for money?" Thomas glanced down at her, and there was something fierce in his expression that was not directed at her but at whoever had hurt her. "You need help. That is enough." The doctor's house was a neat clapboard structure behind the main street. Thomas knocked with his boot since his hands were full, and a moment later the door opened to reveal a white-haired man with spectacles and kind eyes. "Thomas," the doctor said, then saw Adelaide and his expression shifted to professional concern. "Bring her in quickly." The doctor's wife, a plump woman named Martha Henderson, fussed over Adelaide immediately, helping her out of Thomas's arms and onto a clean bed in a small room that smelled of lavender and soap. Adelaide caught one last glimpse of Thomas standing in the doorway, his gray eyes still watching her with that strange intensity, before Martha shooed him out and shut the door. Over the next few hours, Martha helped Adelaide wash and examined her injuries with practiced efficiency. She clicked her tongue over the bruises, the half-healed cuts, the ribs that were likely cracked. She brought soup and bread and insisted Adelaide eat slowly. She did not ask questions, which Adelaide was grateful for, because she did not know what she would say. The truth felt too heavy, too shameful, though she knew logically that Marcus's violence was not her fault. "That Mountain Man who brought you in," Martha said as she helped Adelaide into a clean nightgown, one of her own. "He has been living up in the mountains for near about 5 years now. Keeps to himself mostly, but he has a good heart. Found a lost child last winter and carried her down through a blizzard. Nearly froze himself doing it, but the child lived. He does not talk much about where he came from, but my husband says he has seen his share of trouble." Adelaide nodded, too tired to respond. Martha pulled the quilts up around her and dimmed the lamp. "You rest now, dear. You are safe here. Whatever you are running from cannot reach you while you are under our roof." Adelaide wanted to believe that, wanted to so badly it hurt. But Marcus had reach. He had money and connections. He would come looking for her eventually. Men like Marcus always did. She fell asleep anyway, exhaustion pulling her under like a riptide, and for the first time in 2 years, she slept without fear that she would be woken by fists or cruel hands. The next 3 days passed in a blur of sleep and healing. Dr. Henderson checked her injuries each morning and pronounced them mending well, though he looked troubled by the pattern of old and new bruises, the scars that told stories Adelaide would never voice aloud. Martha brought food and sat with her, chattering about the town gossip, about the upcoming harvest dance, about anything and nothing. She never pushed Adelaide to talk about herself. On the 4th day, Adelaide felt strong enough to sit up for longer periods. Martha brought her a dress, simple but clean, in a dark blue calico that fit reasonably well. "You cannot stay in nightgowns forever," Martha said cheerfully. "Besides, you have a visitor." Adelaide's heart clenched with sudden fear. "Who?" "Thomas Garrett. He has come by every day to ask after you, but this is the first time I have thought you well enough for company. Shall I send him in?" Adelaide nodded slowly, curious despite herself. She could not imagine why the Mountain Man would care about a stranger he had found collapsing in the street. Thomas had to duck slightly to enter the room, his size making the small space feel even smaller. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously, which seemed absurd for a man so physically imposing. He looked freshly washed, his long hair still damp, his beard neatly combed. "Miss," he said, inclining his head respectfully, "I am glad to see you looking better." "Thank you," Adelaide said, "for helping me. I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there." Thomas pulled up a chair and sat down, though he still seemed too large for the furniture. "I am glad I was there." He paused, seeming to wrestle with words. "Miss, I do not mean to pry into your business, but I have seen enough of the world to recognize when someone is running from something bad. If there is a man looking for you, if there is danger following you, you should tell me." "I can help." Adelaide looked down at her hands, at the fading bruises on her wrists where Marcus had grabbed her. "I do not want to bring trouble to anyone else." "You did not bring trouble. Trouble found you, I think, through no fault of your own." Thomas's voice was steady, patient. "I am offering help, not judgment. You do not have to tell me everything, but at least tell me if someone is likely to come looking for you here." Adelaide took a shaky breath. "My husband, Marcus Pemberton from Denver. He will look for me when he realizes I am not coming back. He has money. He has friends, and he does not like losing things he considers his." She saw Thomas's jaw tighten under his beard, saw his hands clench on his hat brim. "He did that to you? All those bruises and breaks?" "Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "You are not his anymore. You are your own person, and no man has the right to treat you that way. If he comes here, he will have to go through me first, and I promise you, miss, that is not a thing he will want to do." Something in Adelaide's chest loosened, just a fraction. "Why are you helping me? You do not even know me." Thomas met her eyes, and there was something old and sad in his expression. "I had a sister once, back in Sweden. My father was a hard man, a mean man when he drank. I was too young to protect her. When I was 18, I came home one day and found her in the barn. She had hanged herself. She was only 16. His voice roughened. "I swore that day that if I ever had the chance to help someone in a situation like hers, I would. So that is why I am helping you, miss, because no one helped her, and I have carried that weight for 10 years now." Adelaide felt tears burning in her eyes. "I am so sorry." Her name was Ingrid. She had a laugh like bells ringing. Thomas looked away out the small window. "I came to America after that. Could not stay in that place anymore. Worked logging camps, then mines, then just kept going up into the mountains. Found peace in the high places, away from people and their cruelties. But I am not so far removed that I cannot come down when someone needs help." "You are not like other men," Adelaide said softly. Thomas looked back at her, and for the first time he almost smiled. "I take that as a compliment given the men you have known. Look, miss, I have a proposal for you. Winter is coming to the high country. I have a cabin up in the mountains, good and sturdy, with a second room that I use for storage. You could stay there until spring, until you are fully healed and have figured out what you want to do next. It is far enough from town that if your husband comes looking, he would never find you. And I give you my word, on my sister's memory, that you would be safe. I would not touch you or trouble you in any way. You would have your own space, your own door that locks from the inside." Adelaide stared at him. "You are offering me sanctuary in your home. We have known each other for 4 days. I am offering you time and safety, that is all. No strings, no expectations, just a place to heal." Thomas stood up, settling his hat back on his head. "You think about it, I will be in town for 2 more days getting supplies. If you decide you want to take me up on it, tell Doc Henderson and he will find me. If not, no hard feelings. Either way, I will keep an eye out for your husband. He will not hurt you again, not while I am breathing." He left before Adelaide could respond, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. Adelaide sat in the sudden silence, her mind spinning. The offer was insane. She would be isolated in the mountains with a man she barely knew. Every reasonable instinct told her it was dangerous. But then, every reasonable instinct had told her to be an obedient wife to Marcus, and that had nearly killed her. Maybe reasonable was not what she needed right now. Maybe she needed exactly what Thomas was offering: time and space to figure out who Adelaide Kingsley was when she was not afraid. That evening she told Martha about Thomas's offer. Martha pursed her lips thoughtfully. Thomas is a good man, as good as they come. A bit rough around the edges, but he has never been anything but respectful to the women in town. And it is true that you would be hidden away up there. Marcus Pemberton could search Lavetta from top to bottom and never think to look in the high mountains. Most city men would not even attempt those passes. You think I should go? I think, Martha said carefully, that you should do whatever makes you feel safest. If that is staying here in town, we will find you work and a place to live. If that is going up to Thomas's cabin, then that is your choice to make. But I will tell you this. My husband has known Thomas for 5 years, and he has never once known him to be dishonest or cruel. If he says you will be safe, you will be safe. Adelaide made her decision that night. She had spent 2 years living in fear, letting Marcus dictate every aspect of her existence. She was done being afraid. If Thomas Garrett was offering her a chance to heal, to breathe, to find herself again, then she would take it. Consequences be damned. The next morning, she told Dr. Henderson to send word to Thomas that she accepted his offer. The doctor looked relieved. Good. I will feel better knowing you are well out of reach. Thomas will take good care of you, and his cabin is one of the most defensible spots in these mountains. Anyone trying to reach it would be seen long before they got close. Thomas came by that afternoon with supplies and a gentle mare he said was called Daisy. She is steady on mountain trails, he explained to Adelaide. I will be walking, leading my pack mule, so we will not be moving too fast. Are you well enough to ride? Adelaide nodded. Her ribs still ached, but the pain was manageable now, and she was desperate to be away from town, from places where Marcus might think to look for her. Martha had given her several dresses, a warm coat, and a bonnet. Dr. Henderson had refused payment, waving away Adelaide's protests. Just get well, he had said. That is payment enough. They left Lavetta in the early afternoon, heading west into the mountains. The trail was steep and winding, cutting through stands of aspen and pine, climbing steadily into the high country. Thomas walked ahead, leading the pack mule loaded with supplies, moving with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who knew these mountains intimately. Adelaide followed on Daisy, who proved to be as steady as promised, picking her way carefully over rocks and roots. Thomas did not push for conversation, which Adelaide appreciated. She was too busy drinking in the beauty around her. The aspens were in full autumn glory, their leaves a brilliant gold that seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight. The air was thin and clean, scented with pine and the first hint of coming snow. Eagles circled overhead, riding thermals. A deer watched them from a meadow, ears flicked forward with curiosity rather than fear. It was so different from Denver, from the close, suffocating walls of Marcus's house, from the stink and noise of the city. Adelaide felt something in her chest expand, something that had been compressed and crushed for so long she had forgotten it existed. Hope, maybe, or possibility. They stopped to rest by a stream in the late afternoon. Thomas helped Adelaide down from Daisy with careful, impersonal hands, then filled canteens with cold, clear water that tasted like snow and stone. He handed her some jerky and hardtack from his supplies. It is not fancy, he said apologetically. It is fine, Adelaide assured him. She was not used to fancy. Marcus had liked fancy things, but he had never thought his wife deserved them. "We will reach the cabin by sunset," Thomas said, settling onto a fallen log and pulling out a piece of jerky for himself. "It is not much, but it is warm and dry. I built it myself 4 years ago. Been adding to it every year, making improvements. The second room used to be just storage, but I finished the walls last summer and put in a proper window. You will have privacy there." "I appreciate this more than I can say," Adelaide told him. "I know it is strange, taking in a stranger like this." "We are all strangers until we are not," Thomas said simply. He looked out over the mountains, his expression distant. "These mountains teach you what matters and what does not. Out here, things like social conventions and what people might say do not mean much. What matters is survival, helping each other, being decent. Everything else is just noise." Adelaide studied him in the slanting afternoon light. He was handsome in a rough, wild way, all hard muscle and sharp features softened only slightly by his beard. His hands were scarred and calloused, working hands that had clearly seen hard labor. There was a strength to him that was not just physical but something deeper, a core of integrity that Marcus had never possessed. "Why did you really leave Sweden?" she asked quietly. "Was it just your sister?" Thomas was silent for a long moment. "My sister was part of it, but I also knew that if I stayed I would eventually kill my father. I wanted to. I planned it even, how I would do it. But Ingrid would not have wanted that, would not have wanted me to become a murderer because of him. So I left instead. Came to America with nothing but the clothes on my back and enough anger to cross the ocean. The mountains taught me how to let go of that anger, how to turn it into something else. Determination, maybe. A desire to be better than the man who raised me." "I understand that," Adelaide said. "Wanting to be better than what you came from." "You will get there," Thomas said, and there was conviction in his voice. "You are already stronger than you know, just by surviving what you survived and having the courage to run." They reached the cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. The cabin was tucked into a small valley surrounded by tall pines, with a creek running nearby and mountains rising on all sides. It was built of thick logs chinked with mud and moss, with a stone chimney and 2 windows covered with oiled paper that let in light while keeping out the wind. A small barn stood nearby, already home to a milk cow and some chickens that Thomas had left in the care of a neighbor lower down the mountain. Thomas helped Adelaide down from Daisy again, then unlocked the cabin door. Inside, it was simple but clean. A main room with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies and books. A loft above that Thomas used for sleeping. And to the right, a door leading to the second room. "Your room," Thomas said, pushing open the door. It was small but cozy, with a narrow bed covered in quilts, a small dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and the promised window looking out over the valley. "The door has a lock. Here is the key. Only you will have it. I give you my word that I will never enter without your permission." Adelaide took the key, closing her fingers around the cold metal. "Thank you, Thomas," he nodded, already turning away to start a fire in the main room. "Get settled. I will make dinner. Nothing fancy, just stew, but it will be warm." Adelaide went into her room and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. Then, experimentally, she turned the key in the lock. It clicked solidly home. She was safe here. Thomas had given her the means to protect herself even from him, had put control back in her hands. She sank onto the bed and let herself cry for the first time since leaving Denver. Not tears of pain or fear, but tears of relief, of release, of grief for everything she had lost and everything she had never had. She cried for the girl who had been sold to Marcus to pay her father's debts. She cried for the wife who had learned to flinch at shadows and sleep with one eye open. And she cried for the woman she was now, broken and bruised but still breathing, still fighting, still here. Eventually, the tears stopped. Adelaide washed her face in the basin, using the cool water Thomas must have filled before they arrived. She smoothed her hair and dress and unlocked her door, stepping out into the main room. Thomas was at the fireplace, stirring a pot of stew that smelled of meat and vegetables and herbs. He glanced over his shoulder at her. "All right." "Yes," Adelaide said and meant it. "I am all right." They ate at the table, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. The stew was simple but good, and Adelaide ate more than she had in days, her appetite finally returning. Thomas cleaned up afterward, refusing her offers to help. "You are still healing," he said firmly. "You need rest more than I need help with dishes." As the evening wore on, Thomas sat by the fire with a book written in what Adelaide assumed was Swedish, the flickering light making shadows dance across his bearded face. Adelaide sat across from him, mending a tear in one of the dresses Martha had given her, comfortable in the quiet. It was strange how easy it was to be around him, this man who was little more than a stranger. There was no tension, no waiting for the other shoe to drop, no constant vigilance required, just peace. "You can read?" Adelaide asked after a while, curious. Thomas looked up from his book. "Yes. My mother taught me before she died when I was young. She was a teacher's daughter, educated. She made sure I learned Swedish and English both, said education was the one thing no one could take from you." He gestured to the shelves. "I have books in both languages. You are welcome to read any of them." Adelaide had learned to read as a girl, but Marcus had not liked her reading. He said it gave women ideas, made them forget their place. She had not touched a book in 2 years. "I would like that," she said softly. "Good." Thomas went back to his reading, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That became the pattern of their days. Thomas would rise before dawn, start the fire, milk the cow, feed the chickens, and prepare a simple breakfast. Adelaide would wake to the smell of coffee and porridge, would eat with Thomas at the table, and then he would head out to do the day's work. Chopping wood for winter, hunting for meat, checking his trap lines, repairing fences and tools. Adelaide spent her days reading from Thomas's collection of books, cooking meals that were more elaborate than his simple fare, and slowly, carefully, letting herself heal. The bruises faded from purple to yellow to nothing. Her ribs stopped aching. Her split lip mended. The swelling around her eye disappeared. And something deeper healed too, something that had been broken inside her for so long she had stopped noticing the pain. Thomas was as good as his word. He never entered her room without permission. He never touched her casually or tried to get physically close. He treated her with a respect and consideration that Adelaide had never experienced from a man. When he spoke to her, he looked at her face, not her body. When she expressed an opinion, he listened and responded thoughtfully rather than dismissing her. He asked her preferences, her thoughts, her ideas, and actually seemed to care about the answers. It was bewildering and wonderful and terrifying all at once. October slipped into early November. The first snows came, dusting the mountains in white. Thomas spent long days bringing in the last of the firewood, smoking meat, preparing the cabin and barn for the long winter ahead. Adelaide helped where she could, her strength returning day by day. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Adelaide found herself watching Thomas as he carved something from a piece of wood, his large hands surprisingly deft. The firelight caught in his hair, turning the brown to bronze, and illuminated the concentration on his face. He was handsome, she realized with a start. Not in the refined, polished way Marcus had been handsome, but in a raw, elemental way that suited these mountains. "What are you making?" she asked. Thomas held up the piece. It was taking the shape of a small bird. "A chickadee. They stay here all winter, brave little things. I like to carve when I am thinking." "What are you thinking about?" "Winter mostly. Whether I brought in enough supplies, whether the barn roof will hold under heavy snow, boring practical things." He paused, then added quietly, "And whether you are happy here, whether this is helping you or if I made a mistake bringing you up here where you are so isolated." Adelaide considered the question seriously. "I am happier here than I have been in years," she said honestly. "It is strange because I should be afraid. I am alone in the mountains with a man I barely know, but I am not afraid of you, Thomas. I have not been afraid since that first day when you carried me to the doctor. You have only ever been kind." "You should not have to thank a man for basic kindness," Thomas said, his voice rough with some emotion Adelaide could not quite name. "That should be the baseline, not something exceptional." "But it is exceptional," Adelaide said. "You are exceptional. You gave me safety when I had none. You asked nothing in return. You treat me like a person, not property. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Thomas set down his carving and looked at her directly. "You are a person, Adelaide. You are smart and strong, and you deserve to be treated with dignity. Any man who did less was a fool and a coward." Something in Adelaide's chest tightened at the way he said her name, the first time he had used it instead of calling her Miss. It sounded different in his slightly accented voice, softer somehow. "Thomas," she said, testing his name on her tongue. "May I ask you something personal?" "Yes. In all the years you have been up here, have you been completely alone? No wife, no sweetheart?" Thomas shook his head. "No one. There was a girl once back in Sweden before everything with my father and Ingrid. But that was a lifetime ago, a different person. Since coming to the mountains, I have been alone. I told myself it was because I did not want to inflict my broken parts on anyone else, but truthfully, I think I was just afraid. Afraid that I would turn out like my father. Afraid that I carried his violence in my blood." "You are nothing like your father," Adelaide said fiercely. "Nothing. A man like your father would never have helped me, would never have given me space and safety and asked nothing in return. You are kind, Thomas. That is not something you can fake. It is who you are." Thomas looked at her with something raw and vulnerable in his gray eyes. "I hope you are right," he said quietly, "because lately I find myself wanting things I have not let myself want in a very long time." The air between them suddenly felt charged with possibility. Adelaide's heart was beating faster, and she was acutely aware of every detail. The way the firelight played across Thomas's features, the way he was looking at her like she was something precious, the way her own body was responding, not with fear but with something entirely different. But Thomas, being Thomas, did not push. He simply picked up his carving again and went back to work, giving Adelaide space to process whatever was happening between them. That night, Adelaide lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about kindness and attraction and the difference between wanting to be close to someone and being afraid of them. With Marcus, intimacy had been an ordeal to be endured, something painful and degrading that she submitted to because she had no choice. The thought of Thomas touching her did not fill her with dread. It filled her with curiosity and something warmer, something that felt like longing. It was a revelation. She was capable of wanting, of desiring. Marcus had not beaten that out of her after all. The next few weeks brought heavier snows. Thomas had been right to prepare so thoroughly, because by late November they were snowed improperly, the passes down to Lavetta impassable until spring. Adelaide found she did not mind. The cabin felt like its own small world, warm and safe. a sanctuary from everything beyond its walls. She and Thomas fell into an easy domesticity. They cooked together, read aloud to each other in the evenings, played cards and chess. Thomas taught her to carve simple shapes from wood. Adelaide taught him some songs her mother had sung when she was small. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their childhoods, their thoughts on the books they read, their observations about the wildlife around the cabin. And through it all, Adelaide felt herself falling. Not quickly or dramatically, but slowly, steadily, like snow accumulating on the mountains. She was falling in love with Thomas Garrett, with his quiet strength and gentle hands, with the way he listened to her like her words mattered, with the way he looked at her like she was someone worth looking at. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was nothing like anything she had felt before. One evening in early December, a blizzard rolled in, howling around the cabin with a fury that shook the walls. Thomas built up the fire high and made sure all the shutters were secured. They ate dinner listening to the wind scream outside, and afterward, as they sat by the fire, Adelaide found herself shivering despite the warmth. "Are you cold?" Thomas asked, immediately concerned. "No, I just—" Adelaide wrapped her arms around herself. "The sound reminds me of Marcus when he was angry, the way he would shout. I know that is foolish." "It is not foolish." Thomas hesitated, then said carefully, "Would it help if I sat closer? Sometimes having someone nearby makes the storms less frightening." "But only if you are comfortable with that." Adelaide considered, then nodded. "I think I would like that." Thomas moved from his chair to sit beside her on the bench near the fireplace, though he left a careful foot of space between them. His presence was comforting, solid and warm. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm, and gradually Adelaide felt herself relaxing. "Tell me something good," she said after a while. "Something happy from your childhood before everything went bad." Thomas thought for a moment. "My mother used to take Ingrid and me berry picking in the summers. We would go out into the forests with baskets and pick lingonberries for hours. Mother would tell us stories about the forest spirits, the Hulders and Tomtons who protected the woods. Ingrid believed every word. She would leave little offerings of berries for the Tomtons, sure that they would bless our house in return." His voice was soft with memory. "When we got home, Mother would make jam and pastries, and the house would smell like sugar and summer. Those were good days." "She sounds lovely, your mother," Adelaide said. "She was. She deserved better than my father." Thomas glanced at Adelaide. "Your turn. Tell me something good." "My mother and I used to go to the market together on Saturday mornings," Adelaide said, pulling up a memory she had not examined in years. "This was before she died, when I was maybe 8 or 9. She would let me carry the basket and pick out the vegetables. There was a woman who sold flowers, and Mother would always buy me one flower, just one, to take home and put in a jar by my bed. Usually a daisy or a wildflower, nothing expensive, but I felt like a princess carrying that flower home." Adelaide smiled sadly. "After Mother died, Father could not be bothered with things like flowers or market trips. He sent me with the housekeeper instead, and it was never the same." "Your father sold you to Marcus to pay gambling debts," Thomas said, "and it was not a question." "Yes." "I was 18 and foolish enough to think that surely a husband could not be worse than living in a house where I was just another mouth to feed. I was very wrong." "That was not foolishness. That was hope. Anyone would have hoped for better." Thomas shifted slightly, his shoulder now just barely touching hers. "You deserved flowers and kindness and love. You still do." "So do you," Adelaide said, looking up at him. "You have been alone up here for 5 years, punishing yourself for something that was not your fault. You could not save your sister, Thomas. You were a child yourself." I was 18, old enough. I was 18 when I married Marcus. Do you think I was old enough to know better? Old enough that I should have saved myself? Thomas frowned. Of course not. You were a victim of your circumstances, of men who should have protected you and failed. And you were a victim of yours. A violent father, a society that did not protect vulnerable women, and the tragedy of being too young to change any of it. You have carried guilt that is not yours to carry. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then carefully, slowly, he lifted his arm and placed it around Adelaide's shoulders. Is this all right? Adelaide leaned into him, resting her head against his solid shoulder. Yes, she whispered. This is very all right. They sat like that as the blizzard raged outside, drawing comfort from each other's presence, and Adelaide felt something she had never felt before when touching a man. Safe, cherished, like she mattered. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world encased in snow and ice that glittered like diamonds in the sunlight. Thomas went out to check on the animals and dig paths to the barn and the woodshed. Adelaide made a hearty breakfast of porridge with dried berries and honey, and when Thomas came back in, stamping snow from his boots, she had coffee waiting. It is beautiful out there, he said, but cold enough to freeze your breath. We are well and truly snowed in now. Probably will be until March at the earliest. I do not mind, Adelaide said, and she meant it. Out there, beyond the snow and the mountains, Marcus was still looking for her, still angry that his property had escaped. Out there, she was still a woman with no rights, no money, no power. But in here, in this cabin with this man who treated her like she had value, she was free. Over the weeks that followed, Adelaide and Thomas grew even closer. The physical distance between them shrank gradually. Thomas would put his hand on the small of her back when guiding her through a doorway. Adelaide would brush snow from his hair when he came inside. They sat close together by the fire now, shoulders touching, sometimes holding hands, though Thomas never pushed for more. Adelaide knew he was holding back deliberately, giving her time, giving her control. She loved him for it, even as she began to wish he would push, just a little. But Thomas's respect for her boundaries was absolute, and if she wanted more, she would have to be the one to reach for it. Christmas came. Thomas had no decorations, but he cut a small pine and brought it inside, and Adelaide strung it with dried berries and bits of ribbon she had found in her sewing supplies. They roasted a goose and made simple gifts for each other. Adelaide had knitted Thomas a pair of thick woolen socks, working on them secretly in her room at night. Thomas had carved her a small wooden bird, a daisy painted in delicate detail, in memory of her mother and market flowers. Adelaide held the carved bird in her palm, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of it. "It is perfect," she managed to say. "You are crying," Thomas said, alarmed. "Did I upset you?" "No, no, these are happy tears." Adelaide set the bird carefully on the table and threw her arms around Thomas, hugging him fiercely. "Thank you. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." Thomas's arms came around her slowly, carefully, holding her like she was made of spun glass. "You are very welcome," he said, his voice rough. "I am glad you like it." Adelaide pulled back just enough to look up at his face. They were so close, his gray eyes searching hers, his breath warm on her face. She saw the moment he realized what she was thinking, saw his pupils dilate and his lips part slightly. But still, he did not move. "Adelaide," he said quietly. "You do not have to, I know I do not have to," she interrupted. "I want to if you want to. Do you want to?" "More than anything," Thomas admitted. "But I need you to be sure. I need you to know that I will stop the moment you ask me to, always, no matter what." "I know that," Adelaide said, and she did. She trusted this man more than she had trusted anyone in her life. "I am sure, Thomas. please kiss me." Thomas cupped her face in his large, calloused hands with a gentleness that made Adelaide's heart ache. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and then his lips were on hers. Soft, tender, reverent, nothing like Marcus's brutal, possessive kisses. This was a question, not a demand. An offering, not a taking. Adelaide's eyes fluttered closed and she leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on Thomas's broad chest. She could feel his heart pounding under her palms, could feel him trembling slightly with restraint. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be savored, and when he finally pulled back, Adelaide felt tears on her cheeks again. "Why are you crying?" Thomas asked, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears. "No one has ever kissed me like that before," Adelaide whispered. "Like I mattered, like I was something other than an object to be used." Thomas's expression turned fierce. "You do matter. You are everything good and strong and brave, Adelaide. Any man who treated you as less was a blind fool." Then, slowly, he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, holding them there for a long moment. The gesture was so tender, so reverent, that Adelaide felt something break open in her chest. She had never been kissed with tenderness before. She had never been touched like she was sacred, like she was someone worth protecting and cherishing. The mountain man kissed her forehead like she was the most precious thing in his world, and Adelaide finally understood what it felt like to be loved. "Thomas," she breathed. "Yes, I love you. I think I have loved you for a while now, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid it was too soon or too complicated, or that I was confusing gratitude with love. But it is not gratitude, it is love. You are the best man I have ever known, and I love you." Thomas pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and holding her tight. "I love you too," he said into her hair. "I have loved you since the day you unlocked your door and came out to have dinner with me instead of hiding. Since you showed me that you were not just surviving but fighting to live again. You are so strong, Adelaide, so much stronger than you know." They stood there in the firelight holding each other, and Adelaide felt the last of her walls crumble. She was safe. She was loved. She was home. That night, Adelaide did not return to her room. She stayed with Thomas in the loft, and he held her as they slept, his body curled protectively around hers. Nothing more than holding, nothing more than closeness, but it was everything Adelaide needed, to be touched with gentleness, to sleep without fear, to wake in the arms of a man who loved her. The winter passed in a haze of quiet happiness. Adelaide and Thomas lived as partners, sharing the work and the warmth and the long, peaceful evenings by the fire. They talked about the future, about what would happen when spring came. Adelaide told Thomas about her marriage to Marcus, about how she had never actually wanted to divorce him because she had been too afraid he would kill her for the insult. Thomas told her about the law, about how abandonment and cruelty were grounds for divorce in Colorado, about how he knew a lawyer in Lavetta who could help when the time came. "Marcus will fight it," Adelaide said. "He has money and connections. What chance do I have?" "You have me," Thomas said firmly. "You have the doctor's testimony about your injuries. You have Martha's. You have your own voice and your own truth. Marcus Pemberton does not get to win this time. I will not let him." In February, during a brief break in the weather, Thomas made the dangerous trek down to Lavetta for supplies and news. He returned 3 days later with goods, letters from the Hendersons, and information that made his face grim. "Marcus has been looking for you," he told Adelaide as they sat by the fire that evening. "He came to Lavetta in January, asking questions, offering a reward for information about a missing woman matching your description. Doc Henderson and Martha told him nothing. Most of the town told him nothing, actually. Apparently, he made quite a scene in the saloon, drunk and belligerent, and people did not take kindly to his attitude. Adelaide felt ice in her stomach. He will not give up. He is too proud. Let him look. He will never find this cabin unless someone guides him here, and no one in Lavetta will do that. The mountain folk protect their own, and they have decided you are one of their own now. Thomas took her hand. But when spring comes, we will need to deal with this legally. You need to petition for divorce and get it finalized so that he has no legal claim on you anymore. The lawyer I mentioned, his name is James Morrison, and he has agreed to take your case for a minimal fee. He does not like men who abuse their wives. All right, Adelaide said. When spring comes, we will do this properly. We will end my marriage to Marcus once and for all. And then, Thomas asked, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand, and then, if you will have me, I would like to stay here, with you. Build a life in these mountains, away from people like Marcus, away from a world that treats women like property. Here, where I am free. Thomas lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. I will have you, Adelaide Kingsley, today, tomorrow, and every day after. You are mine and I am yours, and that is the truth of it, legal papers or not. March brought the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. The creeks swelled with runoff. Birds returned from their winter migrations, filling the valley with song. And the passes down to Lavetta became navigable again. Thomas and Adelaide made the trip down together in early April, riding side by side on a day so beautiful it seemed impossible that anything bad could exist in the world. They stopped first at the Hendersons, where Martha hugged Adelaide fiercely and declared she looked 1,000 times better than she had in the fall. Dr. Henderson examined her, pronounced her fully healed, and wrote a detailed statement about her injuries for the lawyer. James Morrison turned out to be a thin man with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. He listened to Adelaide's story without interruption, taking notes in a neat, precise hand. When she finished, he set down his pen and looked at her directly. Mrs. Pemberton, I will not lie to you. This will not be easy. Your husband will fight the divorce, and he will likely say terrible things about you in court. He will try to make it seem like you were a disobedient wife who ran away from a perfectly good marriage. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Adelaide said. Thomas sat beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his presence giving her strength. I am prepared to tell the truth, no matter how ugly it gets. I am done being afraid of Marcus. Good. Morrison shuffled his papers. I will file the petition this week on the grounds of extreme cruelty and abandonment. Given Dr. Henderson's statement and the physical evidence he documented when you arrived in town, I believe we have a strong case. The judge who handles these matters, Judge Carter, is fair-minded and does not tolerate domestic violence. He will want to hear from you directly, so be prepared to testify. I will, Adelaide promised. They stayed in Lavetta for a week while Morrison prepared the legal papers. Thomas rented them a room at the boarding house, insisting on separate beds, though everyone in town seemed to know they were together. When we marry, it will be legal and proper, he told Adelaide. I will not give Marcus any ammunition to use against you. The petition was filed. Notices were sent to Marcus in Denver. And then there was nothing to do but wait for the court date and his response. They returned to the cabin for the summer. Thomas had work to do, planting a larger garden now that he had 2 mouths to feed, repairing winter damage, hunting and fishing to stock their larder. Adelaide worked beside him, learning the rhythms of mountain life, growing stronger and more capable with each passing week. In June, word came from Morrison. Marcus was contesting the divorce and demanding that Adelaide return to Denver to fulfill her wifely duties. He claimed she had been kidnapped by a mountain man and was being held against her will. The court date was set for late July. "He is lying," Adelaide said, reading the letter with shaking hands. "He knows I left willingly. He is just trying to maintain control." "The truth will come out in court," Thomas assured her. "Judge Carter will see through his lies, and I will be there beside you every step of the way." Late July arrived too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Thomas and Adelaide rode down to Lavetta 2 days before the hearing so Adelaide could meet with Morrison and prepare her testimony. The lawyer coached her on what to expect, how to answer questions, how to stay calm when Marcus tried to provoke her. "He will be in the courtroom," Morrison warned. "You will have to face him directly. Can you do that?" Adelaide thought about the woman she had been 8 months ago, terrified and broken, unable to imagine a future beyond survival. She thought about the woman she was now, healed and loved and strong. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." The hearing was held in the small courthouse on Main Street. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, many of whom had come to support Adelaide. The Hendersons were there. Martha sat in the front row, her face fierce with protective anger. Even some of the miners and ranchers who barely knew Adelaide had come, apparently united in their dislike of Marcus Pemberton and his arrogant ways. Adelaide sat at the front with Morrison and Thomas. Across the aisle, Marcus sat with his own lawyer, a slick-looking man from Denver. Marcus looked much as Adelaide remembered. Handsome in a cold way, well-dressed, his face set in lines of righteous anger. When his eyes met hers, she saw the fury there, the possessiveness, the promise of retribution, but she did not flinch. She met his gaze steadily, and after a moment, it was Marcus who looked away. Judge Carter was an older man with white hair and a stern, weathered face. He called the court to order and asked Morrison to present his case. Morrison stood and outlined Adelaide's petition, reading Dr. Henderson's statement about her injuries, describing the pattern of abuse that had characterized her marriage. He called Dr. Henderson to testify, then Martha, who described Adelaide's condition when Thomas had brought her to their home. "She looked like she had been beaten near to death," Martha said bluntly. "Bruises everywhere, ribs cracked, eyes swollen shut, and she was terrified, Judge. She flinched every time someone moved too quickly. That is not the behavior of a woman in a happy marriage." Then it was Adelaide's turn. She took the stand, swore on the Bible to tell the truth, and began to speak. She told the story simply, without embellishment, how her father had sold her to Marcus to pay his debts, how Marcus had begun hitting her within a week of their marriage, how the violence had escalated over 2 years until she genuinely believed he would kill her, how she had run in the night with nothing but her life. Marcus's lawyer tried to shake her testimony, suggesting she was exaggerating, that perhaps she had been clumsy and prone to accidents, that maybe she had been an unruly wife who had required discipline. Adelaide answered each insinuation calmly, her voice steady. "I was not clumsy," she said. "I was beaten. There is a difference. And if a man requires violence to maintain authority over his wife, then he has no authority worth respecting." Judge Carter's mouth twitched in what might have been approval. Finally, Marcus himself took the stand. He claimed that Adelaide had been a difficult, disobedient wife who had refused to do her duties. He claimed she had run away to punish him for being a firm husband. He claimed Thomas had kidnapped and seduced her, poisoning her mind against her lawful husband. "She belongs to me," Marcus said, his voice hard. "She is my wife, and I have every right to demand her return. This whole hearing is a farce designed to let a hysterical woman abandon her vows." "She is not property," Thomas said loudly from his seat, unable to contain himself. "She is a human being." Judge Carter banged his gavel. "Mr. Garrett, you will have your chance to speak. Mr. Pemberton, you will refrain from referring to your wife as though she is a possession." Marcus's face flushed with anger, but he shut his mouth. Thomas was called to testify next. He described finding Adelaide collapsed in the street, her injuries, the fear in her eyes. He described offering her sanctuary and keeping his word to provide nothing but safety and space. He described watching her heal, watching her find herself again. "I love her," Thomas said simply, looking directly at Marcus. "And she loves me. But that is not why she left you. She left you because you were killing her slowly, day by day. She left you because she wanted to live, and I will be damned if I let you drag her back into that hell." Marcus's lawyer tried to paint Thomas as a mountain savage who had stolen another man's wife, but it did not land well with Judge Carter, who seemed unimpressed by the Denver lawyer's dramatics. Finally, Judge Carter called for closing statements. Morrison stood and made an impassioned speech about a woman's right to safety, about how the law must protect the vulnerable, about how marriage was not a license for cruelty. Marcus's lawyer countered with talk of sacred vows and wifely obedience and the sanctity of marriage. Then Judge Carter retired to his chambers to deliberate. The wait was agonizing. Adelaide sat with Thomas's hand gripped tightly in hers, barely breathing as the minutes stretched into an hour. Around them, the townspeople whispered and shifted. Finally, Judge Carter returned. Everyone stood as he took his seat. "I have reviewed the evidence and heard the testimony," the judge said. "The evidence of abuse is overwhelming and undeniable. Dr. Henderson's statement alone would be sufficient, but combined with Mrs. Pemberton's testimony and the observations of multiple witnesses, the conclusion is inescapable. Mr. Pemberton, you abused your wife systematically and severely. You are fortunate that I cannot charge you criminally for your actions, as they took place outside my jurisdiction, but I can and will address the matter before me." Marcus started to speak, but his lawyer pulled him back down into his seat. "I hereby grant the petition for divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty," Judge Carter continued. "The marriage between Adelaide Kingsley and Marcus Pemberton is dissolved. Mrs. Kingsley, you are free of all legal ties to your former husband. Furthermore, Mr. Pemberton, I am issuing a restraining order. You are not to contact, approach, or in any way communicate with Mrs. Kingsley. If you violate this order, you will be jailed. Do you understand? This is an outrage," Marcus shouted, jumping to his feet. "She is my wife." "You cannot just, she is not your wife," Judge Carter said coldly. "Not anymore. And if you continue to disrupt my courtroom, I will hold you in contempt. Sit down, sir." Marcus sat, his face purple with rage, his hands clenched into fists. Adelaide felt a wild, soaring relief flood through her. It was over. She was free. Legally, finally, completely free. The townspeople erupted in applause. Judge Carter banged his gavel for order but looked secretly pleased. Morrison shook Adelaide's hand, congratulating her. Martha rushed forward to hug her. And Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "He cannot touch you now. You are safe." Adelaide buried her face in Thomas's chest and let herself cry, but these were tears of relief, of joy, of liberation. Marcus tried to approach them as they left the courthouse, but several of the miners stepped into his path, their faces hard, and he thought better of it. His lawyer pulled him toward a waiting wagon, and they left Lavetta that very afternoon. That evening, there was a celebration of sorts at the saloon. The townspeople treated Adelaide and Thomas like heroes, buying them drinks and congratulating them. Adelaide, who had never been in a saloon before, found herself laughing and accepting handshakes from weathered miners and ranchers who told her she was brave and they were proud of her. Late that night, back in their room at the boarding house, Thomas pulled a small box from his pocket. "I have been carrying this for weeks," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. "I know we have not had much time together in normal circumstances, but I also know that I do not want to spend another day without you as my wife. Adelaide Kingsley, will you marry me?" "Yes," Adelaide said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married the next morning by the minister at the small white church. The Hendersons stood as witnesses. Martha cried. Dr. Henderson looked proud. The ceremony was simple, just a few words and the exchange of rings. Thomas had a matching band for himself, and when he slipped it onto his finger, Adelaide felt a surge of possessive pride. He was hers. She was his. They belonged to each other, freely chosen, freely given. They returned to the cabin as husband and wife. And that night, for the first time, they truly became one. Thomas was patient and gentle, always checking that Adelaide was comfortable, always making sure she knew she could stop him at any time. And Adelaide, who had only known intimacy as violence, discovered what it could be when built on love and trust. It was tender. It was passionate. It was a conversation of bodies that spoke of mutual respect and deep affection. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the loft, Adelaide traced the scars on Thomas's chest from old logging accidents and said, "I did not know it could be like this. I did not know it could be something I wanted." "It should always be something both people want," Thomas said, kissing her temple. "Always mutual, always a gift freely given. I am honored that you trust me with this part of yourself, Adelaide. I will never take that trust lightly." The years that followed were the happiest of Adelaide's life. She and Thomas built a life together in the mountains, adding on to the cabin, expanding the garden, raising chickens and a small herd of goats. They made trips down to Lavetta several times a year for supplies and to visit friends. Adelaide became known in town as Thomas's wife, and people liked her for her warmth and her willingness to help anyone who needed it. In the spring of 1878, Adelaide gave birth to their first child, a son they named Eric after Thomas's grandfather. Thomas was terrified through the whole labor, pacing outside while Martha and a midwife attended Adelaide. When he was finally allowed in and saw Adelaide holding their son, tears streaming down his face, he knelt beside the bed and kissed her forehead with such tenderness that Adelaide's heart overflowed. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me a family. For giving me a reason to be better than I thought I could be." "We give each other that," Adelaide said, touching his bearded cheek. "Every day." 2 years later, they had a daughter, Ingrid, named for Thomas's lost sister. She had Adelaide's dark hair and Thomas's gray eyes, and from the moment she was born, Thomas was wrapped around her tiny finger. Watching him be gentle and patient with their children, watching him teach Eric to carve and Ingrid to identify animal tracks, Adelaide sometimes marveled at how far they had both come from the broken people they had been. In 1882, word reached them through a letter from Morrison that Marcus Pemberton had died. He had been killed in a barroom brawl in Denver, drunk and belligerent as usual, picking a fight with the wrong man. Adelaide felt nothing when she heard the news. No grief, no satisfaction, just a vague sense of closure. That chapter of her life was long closed anyway. Marcus was irrelevant to who she was now. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, watching her face as she read the letter. "I am fine," Adelaide said honestly. "He has been dead to me for years." "This just makes it official." Thomas pulled her close, and they stood together looking out over the valley that had become their home. The mountains rose around them, eternal and protective. Smoke curled from the chimney of their cabin. In the yard, Eric was teaching Ingrid how to throw a stick for their dog. The garden was bursting with summer growth. Everything was exactly as it should be. Over the years, they had more children. A second son, William, born in 1884. Another daughter, Clara, in 1887. Each child was loved fiercely, raised with gentleness and respect, taught that strength came from kindness rather than cruelty. Thomas was the father Adelaide had always wished she'd had, patient and present, never raising his hand or his voice in anger. As the children grew, Adelaide sometimes told them edited versions of her story, age-appropriate tales about how she had been in a bad situation, and their father had helped her find safety. When they were older, she told them more, wanting them to understand that people could survive terrible things and still build beautiful lives. Eric, serious and thoughtful like his father, listened with grave attention. Ingrid, fierce and protective, declared that if anyone ever treated her mother badly again, she would make them sorry. "You get that from your father," Adelaide told her daughter with a smile. "He was rather fierce when it came to protecting me too." In 1890, when Eric was 12 and Clara was 3 and Adelaide was pregnant with their 5th child, Thomas surprised her by building an addition onto the cabin, a proper parlor with large windows that looked out over the valley. "You have given me everything," he said as he showed her the finished room. "A home, a family, a reason to wake up grateful every morning. I wanted to give you something back. A space that is beautiful where you can sit and read and watch our children play." Adelaide cried, overwhelmed by the gesture, by this man who still, after 12 years of marriage, found ways to show her she was cherished. Their 5th child, another son they named Peter, was born that fall. The birth was harder than the others, and Adelaide was slow to recover. Thomas refused to let her do anything strenuous for months, taking over all the heavy work, enlisting the older children to help with the younger ones. He brought her tea and books and sat with her in the new parlor, just keeping her company while she regained her strength. "I do not deserve you," Adelaide said one evening, watching him darn socks with the careful, patient movements he brought to everything he did. "You deserve everything good in the world," Thomas corrected. "You deserve every happiness, every comfort, every moment of peace. And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you have them." As the years passed, their children grew and thrived. Eric became a skilled hunter and tracker, following in his father's footsteps. Ingrid was smart as a whip, teaching herself to read advanced books from Thomas's collection by the time she was 8. William had his mother's warm heart and was always bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Clara was adventurous, fearless, climbing trees and exploring the mountains with the confidence of a child who had never known fear in her own home. And Peter, the baby, was cheerful and curious, asking endless questions about everything. In 1895, when Adelaide was 35 and Thomas 43, they sat together on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The children were inside, the older ones helping the younger ones get ready for bed, a nightly routine that required surprisingly little parental intervention these days. "You ever regret it?" Adelaide asked. "Taking in a stranger who brought nothing but trouble and complications into your peaceful life?" Thomas looked at her like she had grown a second head. "Regret you. Regret our life together. Adelaide, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children gave me purpose when I thought I would live and die alone in these mountains. You taught me that I was capable of being loved, that I was not my father's son but my own man. How could I possibly regret that?" "I just know that you gave up your solitude, your quiet life." "I gave up loneliness," Thomas interrupted. "There is a difference. I was not peaceful before you, Adelaide. I was hiding. You brought me back into the world, gave me a reason to be part of life instead of just existing on the edges of it. Adelaide leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor for 17 years. I love you, she said simply. I do not think I tell you that enough, but I love you, Thomas Garrett. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. And you saved mine, Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. We saved each other. That is how the best love stories work. As the years continued, their children began to grow up and find their own paths. Eric, at 20, married a girl from Lavetta and built a cabin on the far side of the valley, close enough to visit frequently but far enough to have his own life. Ingrid, at 18, shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to attend a teaching college in Denver. Adelaide was nervous about her daughter going to the city, but Thomas supported Ingrid's ambition fully. She is smart and strong, he told Adelaide. She can handle herself. And Denver is a different place now than it was when you were there. Safer. More opportunities for women. Ingrid did go to Denver, did get her teaching certificate, and returned to Lavetta to teach at the small schoolhouse, becoming one of the most beloved teachers the town had ever had. William, at 16, announced he wanted to be a veterinarian and started apprenticing with a traveling animal doctor who came through the mountains. Clara, at 13, was still trying to decide what she wanted, but was leaning toward ranching. And Peter, at 10, declared he was going to be a mountain man just like his father. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Adelaide and Thomas became grandparents when Eric and his wife had a daughter. Holding the baby, looking into her tiny face, Adelaide felt the circle of life close in the most satisfying way. She had gone from being that terrified, broken woman stumbling into Lavetta to being a mother, a wife, a grandmother, a respected member of the community. She had gone from believing she had no value to understanding that she was surrounded by people who loved her, who valued her for exactly who she was. You are thinking deep thoughts, Thomas observed, watching her cuddle their granddaughter. I am thinking about how far we have come, Adelaide said. How different life is from what I ever imagined it could be. How grateful I am for every moment. Thomas settled beside her on the porch swing he had built years ago, the one that had held them through countless evenings of conversation and companionship. I am grateful too, he said quietly, for that day in Lavetta when I saw you falling and caught you, for every day since, for the privilege of loving you and being loved by you. Adelaide handed the sleeping baby back to Eric's wife and took Thomas's hand, intertwining their fingers, the gold bands they had worn for over 20 years catching the sunlight. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their family gather in the yard, the sound of children's laughter mixing with adult conversation, the smell of Martha Henderson's apple pie drifting from the kitchen where she was helping prepare dinner for the gathering. Do you remember, Adelaide said softly, that night during the blizzard when you first held me? I remember everything about our time together, Thomas said. You kissed my forehead that Christmas, Adelaide continued, and I realized that I had never been kissed with tenderness before, that I had never been touched like I was something sacred rather than something to be used. It changed everything for me, Thomas. That one gesture of pure gentleness opened a door I thought was closed forever. Thomas lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles, his beard soft against her skin. You are sacred to me, he said simply. You always have been from that very first day. You are the most precious thing in my life, Adelaide. You and our children are life together. Nothing else comes close. As the sun set behind the mountains and their family gathered around them, Adelaide Garrett, formerly Adelaide Kingsley, formerly the terrified wife of Marcus Pemberton, leaned against her husband and felt complete peace. She had survived. More than that, she had thrived. She had built a life full of love and laughter and purpose. She had raised children who knew that strength came from kindness, that love was meant to be gentle, that family was built on respect and mutual support. She had been to hell and back, but she had made it through. And on the other side of that darkness, she had found light in the form of a mountain man with kind gray eyes and gentle hands. A man who had shown her that she deserved tenderness, that she was worthy of being cherished. Together, they had created something beautiful out of the ashes of their broken pasts. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky and the family moved inside for dinner, Thomas and Adelaide stayed on the porch a moment longer, savoring the quiet. The mountains stood eternal around them, protective and strong. The cabin glowed with warm light from within. Their children and grandchildren were safe and happy. "Thank you," Adelaide whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me that day in Lavetta, for not looking away, for giving me time and space and safety, for loving me even when I was too broken to love myself, for showing me what a good man looks like, what a real marriage can be. For everything, Thomas. Thank you for everything." Thomas turned to her and cupped her face in his hands, just as he had that first Christmas when he had kissed her, and he looked at her with all the love and devotion of their 24 years together shining in his eyes. "The privilege has been mine, Adelaide. Every day with you has been a gift. Every moment has been worth treasuring. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, would find you in that street 1,000 times over, would give you sanctuary 1,000 more. Because loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, the kind of kiss that spoke of decades of love and trust and partnership. And Adelaide kissed him back, her heart full to bursting with gratitude and joy and deep, abiding love for this man who had saved her life and then stayed to build a life with her. Inside, someone called them for dinner. Children's voices rose in excited chatter. Life continued in all its beautiful, messy, wonderful abundance. But for one more moment, Adelaide and Thomas stayed on the porch, holding each other under the stars, two souls who had found each other in the darkness and built a light that would shine for generations. They had survived. They had thrived. They had loved, and in the end, that was everything.